Break. Get ready for some important news. Hello, welcome to Task and Purpose First Squad. I'm your host, Chris Cappy. Today we're going to be talking about the Syrian conflict, which is 10 years old at this point, and it's left over 500,000 civilians dead, and over 5 million refugees have been displaced all around the world, which has caused a crisis in the world community. So I want to be able to give you guys a quick surface level understanding of the history of Syria, where they're coming from, what their perspective is. I want to be able to give you kind of a very ground level understanding of what's happening there. So if someone were to ask you offhand, like, hey, excuse me, what's going on over there in Syria? You'd be able to at least pretend like you know what you're talking about, like me. The other thing I want to keep coming back to throughout this video is the military strategic importance of Syria as a country, you know, where it's located geographically and how that relates to the United States goals in the Middle East. And at the end of the video, we're going to take a look at the live conflict map and nail down the status of who is ultimately winning the war at this point, because it looks like the war, after 10 years now, is finally drawing close to an end. I don't want to qualify everything that I say in this video. I'm not a military expert. I'm a veteran of the war in Iraq. I was an infantryman there. I'm an enthusiast of military strategy and geopolitics. I do have a military background though, and I can give some insight, which is what I think is valuable to you, some insight into maybe what the average Russian soldier or the average rebel soldier in Syria is feeling and what they're thinking. Could especially give you some insight into what a soldier in the United States Army over in Syria is thinking, because they have over 900 troops there at the moment. Real quick, let's get into the history of Syria. That'll give us some context as to what's going on there, because you can't really talk about, I realized I was gonna try to make this video without looking deeper into the history of Syria, and you can't really look at this conflict in a vacuum. You have to look at how has world history led us up to this point. And it's kind of fascinating because, to me, part of the beginning of the story of Syria is when Alexander the Great conquered it. This happened back in 320 BC, and the reason it's important is because this was the first time that Syria had a Western influence from Greek and Macedonia. And to this day, that influence survives. There's a town in Syria that is still Greek speaking. After Alexander the Great, there's more Western influence when Pompey from Rome conquers all of Syria. The point I'm trying to make here is Syria for the longest time has been a battleground for the most important empires, largely because of its access to the Mediterranean Sea. He conquered all this land over a course of just a few years before he turned 32, and after Alexander the Great, there was a period of time where Christians were the predominant force in Syria. So you had St. Peter was actually converted, the story goes, on the road to Damascus, which is the capital of Syria. And so Syria historically is important to Muslims, Jews, Christians. It's just there's a lot of history there that all these different world religions find very important. Never mind the oil reserves and the other reasons why this country is important. There are a lot of cultural reasons why people care about Syria and what happens there. And it's not so easy to just dismiss it as, what the heck are we doing in this country where we have what American interests do we have there? Or what interest does anyone have in what's going on all the way around the world? Well, here's what I'm trying to tell you about the strategic importance of Syria extends beyond merely just being a country near Iraq. So after the period of time where the Christians were in charge, the Muslims took over Syria, the Crusades began, and you saw the Pope was sending Christian forces to Syria to try to conquer it, to take it back, but they weren't able to. Then you have the period of time, a long stretch, where the Ottoman Empire is in control of Syria. In World War I, Syria finally gets a brief period of independence, and then France took over until 1946. At the end of World War II, Syria finally becomes a country. But you see how it's steeped in this history of blood, warfare, conquest. That's what they're coming out of. All those struggles of Syria bleed over into this failed attempt to give them independence, and what happens is there's a series of coups in the country, there's a series of military takeover attempts, and there's infighting between these different factions until finally al-Assad's father, the Baathists in Syria, they took over Syria in around, I think it was the 1960s. And since then, it's been in control of the Baathists. They're the Alawite minority in the country. So, there's the Sunnis, Shiites, and the Alawites, I believe, are a sect of the Sunnis. And that's where al-Assad comes from. His father took control once Syria was given independence in the fallout of World War II. So al-Assad, as a ruler, they've been very authoritarian. They've had, honestly, they've had to rule with an iron fist, because you're talking about, they're just coming out of all these wars and attempts to carve Syria into, what France wanted them to be, what the world community wanted them to be after World War II. So it kind of took an iron fist to create some stability there. And since the 1960s, Syria has said that they don't grant a lot of constitutional rights to their citizens, because they've said that their war with Israel is the reason why they can't give rights to their civilians. And their state of emergency, which has been going on for 3 decades or 5 decades, the state of emergency, they've said, is we're at war with Israel. We can't give free elections. We can't give just anyone control. So what ended up happening is the United States goes into Iraq. They try to put democracy in place. They're hoping, put yourself in 2003 mindset. The United States is hoping that there'll be a domino effect of democracy in Syria, in other countries in the region, and that doesn't pan out exactly. But the Arab Spring does happen, and there are many countries like Egypt that they want this democracy. They want more freedom. And in Syria, when al-Assad's father dies, that's when the people there they have this hope that al-Assad is going to be a reformist, that he's going to give more democracy to the region. And that doesn't end up happening. What happens is that he's going to be even just as heavy-handed as his father. He's going to be an authoritarian regime. And so the people revolt, and he puts those revolts down really fast by killing hundreds of people. This spirals out of control into a civil war. Factions in the area like ISIS take advantage of this civil war that's happening, and they take advantage of the fact that the United States has, at this point in 2011, they're just leaving Iraq. So this civil war in Syria spills over into Iraq, and all of the gains that the US military had made in Iraq are now lost because of a civil war that's happening in Syria. Some would say a lot of this destabilization happened from blowback from the Iraq War. What ends up happening next, and this is just my perspective on it, and if you guys have a different view of it, I'd love to hear your takes in the comment section. Let me know if I get any of this wrong, or if you feel like I'm not telling this correctly. But my understanding is ISIS sweeps in from the spillover from the Syrian War. They take over all the way up to Baghdad almost. Where I was in Mushada, ISIS raised the flag just 2 years after I was there. An ISIS flag was raised on the base that I was at, which I remember seeing that article that Mushada had fallen to ISIS after the Syrian spillover. And so this pulls the US back into Iraq and sort of into Syria. And this gets us into, why is Syria so strategically important to the United States, to Russia, to Iran, to Israel? And I'll get into a couple of those reasons that I think a lot of people don't really talk about. And there's this article written by Foreign Policy where Dmitry Frolevsky, and all respect to him and his work, I don't know him well, but he makes the case that Russia is there in Syria because they want to test out their global power. They want to test out their different weapon systems, and that they want to show that they want to flex their world muscles. And I don't buy that take personally. To me, what seems to be happening is more clear than that Russia there's a strategic importance of Syria, which is the Mediterranean Sea. And we can pull up a map of Syria. To me, the answer why Russia's there is because Syria gives them access to the Mediterranean Sea. If you noticed anything in the last week, just the Suez Canal going down for a few days almost caused a world crisis. So you see how intertwined the world economy and all the countries are in this day and age. So Syria is geographically important to Russia because Syria has always been friendly with Russia since the Soviet Union. That coastline is the way that all the oil-rich Middle Eastern countries ship all of their resources to Germany, France, all of the buyers of the oil, all these countries that don't have the natural oil as a resource. So without the Mediterranean Sea, without having some control there, then I think of it like a board game. If you don't have control of this area in some way, then how are you supposed to get all the oil from Iraq, Iran, over to France, Germany, Spain? That's why to Russia, it's very important that they have the coast here. And there's an article that says how Russia is investing millions of dollars in updating that port. And I think strategically, that's what Russia, one of their goals there is to secure that port. So if you look at the United States, I think their goals are a little bit more confusing because originally they got pulled in because they didn't want Iraq to fall to ISIS. And then it's more, the way I look at it, because it's confusing, is the US is there for more making sure that what they don't want to happen doesn't happen. They're trying to prevent the worst case scenario from happening in Syria. The United States has 900 soldiers there to prevent ISIS from taking over, to prevent Iran from being able to run military missions with impunity within Syria. Their goal, I think, is to basically prevent the bad from happening. They're not hoping for if the US could have their wildest dreams come true, then probably al-Assad would be removed and replaced like that, and Syria would have democracy, and everyone would be happy, and roll credits. So that's not realistic, obviously. But what is realistic is the United States can keep 900 soldiers there to protect the oil from going into Russian hands. They can prevent Iraq from falling into extremist hands. That's kind of what I think the US goals are in Syria. That's why they keep 900 troops there. And you might think 900 soldiers, that's not many troops. That's not enough to stop to do much, but really more what it is a deterrent, because if you attack those 900 troops head on, then you're gonna have the full brunt force of the United States on their heels. They'll be there in a minute and you'll be screwed. So they keep 900 soldiers here and there to be like, if you go anywhere near this, then God help you. Russians, on the other hand, have their boots on the ground. They have about 4,500 soldiers on the ground in Syria. And there's an article that states that, and I'll put it in the sources, but Russia claims they've had about 65,000 troops over the past 10 years in direct combat in Syria. So Russians are actually on the ground with tanks. Their military police are helping with convoys. They're actually on the ground trying to make sure that al-Assad stays in control, because that's what's in their interest. The United States is not that involved. It's more of a special forces mission for the US, where they're just going to be there to do surgical raids. They're going to prevent bad things from happening. They'll train up local soldiers to go do the fighting for them, which is a great asset, because military training and equipment and they've funneled more than $1 billion worth of military weapons to the Syrian rebels. So it's no small investment that the US has made there. Israel obviously has a lot of interest in what happens in Syria because of the geographical location of Syria. Basically, if you look at this, the Iranians could run missions, they could use Syria as a base to attack Lebanon. When you talk about the distances that military planes can fly missions, the distances that cruise missiles can fly. You need to be close to a country to attack them. That's why a lot of people were pissed that the United States went to Iraq and Afghanistan. They felt like they were going to be bases to attack other countries. Israel does not want Syria to become a safe haven for extremists and for Iranian government and military to set up camp there and then just kind of do whatever they please towards Israel. And that's why Israelis have been running limited airstrikes in Syria. Because when you look at Syria, it's geographically important. You can't deny that, you can't just say this country is, and its war is in a vacuum, and that it doesn't concern Germany, it doesn't concern the United States. It's right next to Iran, Turkey, Israel. When you have 5 million refugees, most of them going to Turkey, which is a NATO country, then the millions more going to European countries, putting stress on them. And you might say it's their responsibility to take care of those refugees. Wherever you fall on that issue, doesn't matter. It's creating a crisis for the world. So what happens in Syria is important. I can understand why people would feel as though we should just get out and worry about what's happening in our own country. But you have to give a little bit of credence to the fact that what happens in Syria might actually affect what happens to you in the United States on some level. Yes, Syria is a proxy war between these countries that I've talked about, and they all have the incentives that I mentioned. And obviously proxy wars, I'm sure you know, but they're when countries attack each other through an intermediate, basically. So after World War II and the invention of the atomic bomb, war became a zero-sum game. You look at it, you think, oh, there's war everywhere. The world is awful. It's falling apart. In actuality, deaths by war are way down since World War II. Since the invention of the atomic bomb, way less people are dying, way less countries are going to war. Eventually, you could argue that it's going to lead to world destruction with those atomic bombs. But in the meanwhile, we've had a pretty peaceful period between World War II and today. But countries still have conflicts. They still have, there are areas where China and the US want to have the most influence. So how do you resolve? In the past, we resolved problems by going to war. Today, we don't have the luxury of doing that. So countries have to be a little bit more, I'd say, passive aggressive, actually. Countries are very passive aggressive today, where they have to find other ways to piss each other off. They can't just be like, hey, you and everyone, let's have it out in the field back behind the school. No, you have to attack each other's reputation, you have to discredit each other, and you have to train one. I'm not laughing, this isn't funny, this is horrible, but it's a reality. You have to train one Syrian faction to fight the faction that the Russians are backing, the Syrian government. And then you have to see how it plays out. But that's what's happening in Syria. It's a proxy war between Russia and the United States. So this, a lot of people see as a way for Russia and the United States to have at it in a way. And this leads me to a point about military equipment. And we see Russia and the United States trying out new pieces of equipment. It is true, to the point of that foreign policy article in the beginning. Yes, these countries are trying out the weapons that are going to be used in the next major conflicts. So we see, I don't think I have the article right, I do. So we see Jared Keller wrote a great article for Business Insider where he talks about the US Special Operations troops in Syria using a new smart rifle system. It's called Guaranteed Hit Smash 2000. This is insane. When you look at the video, says it the best, but basically everyone knows drones are becoming a problem. Picture this, you're special forces out in the middle of nowhere and suddenly a swarm of drones come to attack you. This system is going to give soldiers the ability to shoot those drones easily without having to worry about missing, because the computer tracks a target that is easy in the sky to track, where it knows where that drone is and it follows it. And then as soon as your rifle barrel lines up in the right position and your finger's on the trigger, it automatically shoots the bullet when the barrel is in the right alignment to hit that tracked object. I hope I explained that right. The video makes it a little easier to understand. But these are one of the systems that are being currently tested out by the United States in Syria. And when you look at the Russians, they're also trying out anti-air systems to see can their S-500 anti-air system detect the United States F-35, which is supposed to be the best stealth fighter jet in the world. So the Russians are testing out different equipment. The United States is testing out different equipment. And we're gonna see, and then you also have the United States testing out their logistics. A lot of people like the Bradley, M2 Bradley, a lot of people don't. The United States deployed with the Bradley to northeastern Syria in 2019. Big public display of, hey, we're here with the big guns, the IFVs are here. These aren't Humvees, these are basically tanks with half a squad of infantry in them. And it made a big show of force about it. And then 2 months later, they had to leave. And no one was sure, why did these Bradleys leave? If you look at the Jane's defense analysis, what happened was that these Bradleys couldn't be logistically supplied. They couldn't be maintained there. So when you talk about the dream infantry fighting vehicle and everyone's like, it should have more armor, more guns, and it should carry a full squad. Okay, but can that vehicle, perfect infantry fighting vehicle, be supported in northeast Syria, far from any logistical bases, far from the motor pool? How long can that vehicle be out in the desert before it needs to be refitted? And they found that the Bradleys couldn't even survive 2 months. They had to pull them out. And when they had to pull out, that caused a ripple effect in Syria where the troops the rebels on the ground had to then side with Moscow because the United States is gone. So all of these things fascinate me. When you see technology having a direct effect on the ground and on the political situation, and all these things of military procurement and military strategy start to intersect at this point. So before I become too full of my own bullshit here, but hopefully someone's following me out there, let's look at the conflict map, because this is something that you guys have been writing to me about a whole bunch, where I get emails from everyone all the time about how much they like this tool, and I gotta go back and find who sent me that resource originally, because thank you so much for sending me that. And please keep emailing me and sending me resources that you like and that are this open source intelligence movement that's going on the internet. I love it. I got an email from a guy named Doug. I won't say his last name, but he's a retired sergeant first class in the Army, and he was intelligence. He was intelligence in the Army, a linguist, and he wrote me. It was really cool. He wrote me saying that he watched the video that I did on the Ukraine situation, and he was saying that he liked the explanation of how Janes.com, my explanation of how Janes.com does an analysis and how they kind of work backwards from seeing how they get a troop estimate, basically, from seeing something like a communications tent. But basically, he said something that I really, really liked, and it's a quote from an old NCO of his, and it says, quote, "Imagine you are tasked with trying to piece together every aspect of someone's life, but all you have to go on is their mail. Not the actual mail, though, just the envelopes the mail came in." So he's saying that this is kind of how an intelligence NCO explained to him the job of intelligence. And that's how I see the open source intelligence community, is a bunch of people looking at the different threads, looking at all the different information and trying to piece it together. And I only have a tiny piece of the puzzle, and I might be wrong about stuff. And that's what open source intelligence is about, is us talking about what do we think is going on? What do we think people's incentives are? Trying to predict what the movements will be in the future based on the past. And I like that explanation of all we have is the envelopes that the mail came in. So all we can see is Con Edison sent a bill, if we looked at my mail anyway. Or maybe I got a birthday card. Or maybe my mom wrote me. Thanks, Mom. I love you. So that brings it back to the live conflict map. And what I want to talk about now is that the war in Syria is ending. And it's been 10 years, and it looks as though we can safely say that Assad appears to be the one that's going to win. He's going to face a lot of problems with, the economy and putting the country back together. But it looks like Russia and Iran and their influences are going to win out, and Assad is going to take back control of Syria, is my understanding. And you can see, if we had looked at this live conflict map 5 years ago, and 5 years ago this would have been popping off everywhere with conflicts, and the red here is what's in government, the Syrian government control. And we would see that red area would be much smaller because the rebels had control of Aleppo, they had control of some of the other strongholds in Raqqa, areas that are going to soon fall to the Syrian government. In just the last 24 hours, we have an ISIS agent was killed and 5 others were arrested in an attack on one of the Syrian Democratic Forces. Syrian opposition forces announced the deployment of an element of the pro-Assad forces on the Al-Kabana axis. Turkey, obviously, their incentive here is this is happening in their backyard. This is basically their home, and there's all this destabilization and violence that they don't want spilling over into their country, like how it did into Iraq. But what I can talk about is what probably the Russian, if you're a Russian your average run-of-the-mill grunt Russian soldier deployed to Syria, you're being told that Syria and their stability is very important. And if Syrian government were to fall to these extremist elements, then it would spill over into Russia, and Russia would lose these oil reserves in Syria and access to the Mediterranean Sea, which is so important to Russia's prosperity. You're on the ground, you're an average soldier in Syria, you're being told that the United States is just trying to be oil pirates. Arr, out on the oil seas trying to steal oil. I am aggressively stupid. If you're a Russian soldier on the ground, that's what you're being told. If you're a rebel soldier, and let's assume you're not one of the extremist elements, you're just someone who wants freedom and independence and democracy and maybe better employment. That's the biggest thing. You got all these young men in Syria who want better employment. They're fighting for an opportunity to get a little bit more of a piece of the pie that they think they deserve. And they don't want to be prosecuted, and so if you're a rebel in Syria, just your average rebel there, you believe that you're fighting for your freedom and your independence, and you're hoping that the United States is going to back you. You're hoping that NATO is going to back you, give you resources and training, and give you the tools that you need to beat this oppressive authoritarian regime that you had hoped would bring reform to your country. But all that's happened has been blood and death, and over 500,000 killed in 10 years. So if you're an average US soldier on the ground in Syria, you're definitely being told that your efforts there are preventing extremists from taking over Iraq and from destroying all the gains that everyone had poured their efforts into in Iraq, and that to make sure that it's all not in vain, our efforts in Syria is to protect the independence and freedom and hopefully democracy for that region. And if I think that pretty much, if you're an extremist element in Syria, then you're being told that you're fighting against the oppressive Syrian government, the oppressive Russian government, the oppressive United States government. You're fighting against the world. If you're one of the extremists, then it's you against the world, which we know is a very healthy mentality, I've been told. Before I sign off, I want to tell you a quick story, because on the other channel, I think sometimes it can seem like maybe I'm glorifying war or glorifying the weapons of war, and I don't want to do that, because war is horrible, and the things that these people are dealing with in Syria right now. I've seen just what the people in Iraq had to deal with, and they bore the brunt of the destruction there and the death. And every other week, my vehicle was the medical Casevac vehicle, and you might think being next to the medic is a great thing in the military. You got the medic attached to your squad right there if you ever need anything, including looking at that rash that keeps popping up. But it's actually not that great, because you're then assigned to basically being the assistant to the medic. And my squad had to constantly help the medic anytime someone got hit by an IED or shot. So one time a local leader was trying to help out the United States. They were trying to work with us. And because of that, he was targeted by the extremists in the area in Iraq. And he was shot in the head. And it was up to my squad to my buddy was holding the breathing tube for the medic, squeezing so that the guy could breathe, even though he had a gunshot in the head. He's bleeding out all over me and the striker. His brain is falling out the back of his head. My buddy's trying to hold it in from the exit wound. And we get him to level 2 trauma at Taji, and he dies about a minute or two later once we get him there. And then we spent the rest of the day washing his blood and brains out of the back of the striker. And this is the other side of war that I don't always get to talk about on the other channel, and how I find the aesthetics and the engineering behind military equipment fascinating and exciting, but at the same time, there's consequences to these conflicts. And I don't know what the right answer ever is, and I don't want anyone to walk away from any of this thinking that I take for granted that I'm safe here where I am, and I don't have to worry about these things. And I have the luxury of talking about them now from the safety of my home. But I understand on maybe it's a microcosm, really small level, the effects of war, but I have an appreciation at the very least for what some of these people are going. Obviously, I don't know what it's like to have your country be torn apart in this way, but I have sympathy for them. So that pretty much wraps it up for me. This is a little bit different of a video where it was more of just me. I've thought a lot about these topics over the past few days, I've thought a lot about Syria over the past few days, and I've tried to piece together my best understanding that I could. And I hope you guys liked the video. Please comment below, let me know what your thoughts are. We don't have to agree on everything. This is just what my understanding is. And thank you for watching. Please remember to like the video because it helps to promote this content. And even if it's not something you agree with, maybe it's a conversation that you think is worth having.